Hey guys, welcome into another episode of Dynasty After Dark. I'm your host, Calvin Timms. You can find me over on Twitter at TDC_Calvin, and hopefully you guys are following me on the Dynasty After Dark YouTube channel. If you are, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to this video so you can tell me that you like this content and you want to see more of it, because I am excited today to bring you the new series that I'm going to be doing this whole off season. I'm not going to be doing it every single episode, but I'm going to be doing quite a few of them. But this is the Rate My Roster series that I'm going to be putting together, where people send in their rosters and I'm going to go through, dissect it, and really kind of give it a grade and give you my final score, the strengths and weaknesses of each and every position on your team, and how you're looking going into 2022. So today I'm excited to bring this roster to you. This is a roster sent to me, and I'm not going to give out any names who sent any of these rosters. So it's fully anonymous. So if you don't want your league mates knowing that you're reaching out to me, that's totally fine as well. So this roster is very interesting. So the league settings, I'm going to go over those real quickly. You can see them here on the right. We got a 10-team league. It's tiered PPR. You got half-point PPR for the running back, full point for the wide receiver, and 1.5 points for the tight end position. Now, they have to start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 3 flex, which makes this a little bit more interesting, and that's what I'll cover here when I start getting into the positional rankings here. But then also it's super flex, so you got 1 super flex slot as well. Draft capital, they've already had their rookie draft this year, and he's got decent capital next year. He's got all his picks. He's got an extra third and an extra fourth. 2024, he looks like he gave up his second, but he's got an extra third and a fourth in that round. So it's looking pretty good for him right there from a draft capital standpoint. But now let's get into the positional rankings here. When you the first thing that jumps off the paper to me with this roster is how good it is, how top heavy it is. It is very, very elite with the players at the top there. You go through the quarterback, you got Josh Allen, you got Jalen Hurts, Ryan Tannehill, Tua, and Matt Corral for quarterbacks. And the way that just to explain my thought process here, when I'm ranking these positional players, the gold, yellow players here, those are your dynasty cornerstones. They're the players that you really want to build around long-term in dynasty. The green players are guys that I think are going to be very good, if not elite, but they have a few red flags. They're either a little bit older or they have a little bit of a competition, or, for example, Sky Moore at the wide receiver position, a little unknown at this point in time. But for example, Sky Moore, very, very young, so you want to keep him around for a while. But these are guys that I'd be willing to move for a very good haul. The red players here, they are players that have a very limited window left before I think that they're going to be essentially valueless. But I think that they can still contribute quite well for fantasy. So they're the kind of players that you don't want to sell unless you get a very, very good offer, because I think that their value to your team is going to be more than what you would get in a trade for one of those guys. The purple players, they're guys that can contribute, but they are unknowns. You don't know what to expect from them, and you could possibly be with or without this asset in a year's time. So, for example, Tua, if he craps out under this coaching staff, it's very unlikely that they keep him in Miami. And if he goes to another team while not looking very good in Miami, I don't think you're going to have a reliable quarterback in Tua moving forward. So that's the thought process there. And then the blue players at the very bottom, if you ran into roster constraint issues, those are the players that I'd be willing to cut if it was me. So breaking down the quarterback position, you got Josh Allen at the top, you got Jalen Hurts right behind him, Ryan Tannehill, Tua Tagovailoa, and Matt Corral. So Josh Allen, definitely a dynasty cornerstone. You want to build around him. He's my number 1 dynasty quarterback. It's a 10-team league, so the difference between Josh Allen and a 10 and 12 team is massive in my opinion, because the biggest thing with a 10-team league is you need more elite options at every single position, which he has almost across the board, but except for one group, you can probably guess which one I'm talking about here. But with a 10-team league, you need elite options. That's the only way you can really make a run at the title. But the quarterback position, you got the number one guy. Jalen Hurts is someone for fantasy is locked and loaded for 2022. I think that if Jalen Hurts eventually moves on from Philadelphia, he's going to get another job. So I don't think you're going to be losing Jalen Hurts if he loses his job in Philly this year. I think that he's going to go somewhere and he's good enough to compete. We've seen that through a couple years now. People don't really love Jalen Hurts for the passing game work, but he's good enough to win. And if you built your offense around him, similar to Lamar Jackson, I think that he can perform. So I think he would be able to get or compete for another starting job from there. So in a super flex league, having those two for fantasy football just sets you apart instantly in my book. You got two top 10 quarterbacks in a super flex league. So already that gives you an advantage right there. Ryan Tannehill is a great option at depth for fantasy. Last year he was down a little bit. It wasn't a great season for him, but he had no weapons. He had no Derrick Henry. He had no A.J. Brown for parts of the season. He had no Julio Jones basically the entire season. So he was thrown to a bunch of nobodies around that roster. Now they've got Treylon Burks. They've got Robert Woods. They have quite a few players that he's going to be able to utilize. And if Derrick Henry goes down, they've got Hassan Haskins and a couple other guys in that backfield that they can compete with and not lose as much. I mean, losing Derrick Henry is a big loss, but you wouldn't be as detrimentally hurt as he was last year. So the crazy thing about Ryan Tannehill, before last season, everyone was talking about how his numbers compared very well to Patrick Mahomes, except for yardage. That's the only one that Patrick Mahomes was better than Ryan Tannehill. But if you look at the weapons that Mahomes has had for the last few seasons, it makes a lot of sense. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce. Tannehill has been very, very efficient and very good. Now, Tua, you might be able to plug him in on bye weeks, but probably unless there's an injury or bye weeks, you're not going to be playing him hardly ever over the other three. And then Matt Corral, he's just a long-term depth option. In a 10-team league, I don't really think he's super necessary. I honestly probably wouldn't rock more than 4 quarterbacks in a 10-team league, but we'll get to some of the advice here at the end. Now, going through the running back position. So real quick before, I've got these grades over here. So for the quarterbacks, I'm going to give you a 10. It's a very, very loaded group of quarterbacks, and I really like it for fantasy football, especially in 2022. 2023, it gets a little bit more interesting. If, for example, Ryan Tannehill loses his job to Malik Willis, you might not have an option there. If Tua gets cut, you might not have an option there. And if Jalen Hurts does go to another team and isn't able to win the starter's role, you might be left with just Josh Allen. Still very, very good as your first quarterback, but again, there are some risks with these guys associated for long term, but for 2022 specifically, I love it right there on its face. So 10 out of 10 for me in the quarterback position. Now, running back, I'm already going to tell you right now, I'm giving this a 10 because this is the most loaded running back roster I think I've seen in a while for a 10-team league. You got Najee Harris, really elite option. I don't love Najee as much as the consensus does, but you got to respect him. I think his volume probably comes down a little bit this year, but that might help his efficiency a little bit more. I know he's bulked up a little bit this offseason, and he's looking good and ready to go this year. So I think Najee will be just fine for fantasy. He's probably, I think he's like the number 2 or number 3. He's probably number 3, I think, right now in terms of dynasty running back rankings. So that's a very good asset to have right there. Austin Eckler right behind him. Austin Eckler, Alvin Kamara, and James Conner, they're all green here. James Conner, I think, is loaded. He is locked for the 2022 season. I think all 3 of these guys, I think you have 4 top 10 running backs right here in these 4 guys. There's some downsides with Kamara. Again, he's a little bit older. The offense is kind of moving in a new direction. And Austin Eckler, again, he's a little bit older. He's been banged up a little bit over the last couple years, but still very, very efficient, very talented. James Conner, same thing, older. All these guys are a little bit older, so that's why they go from the gold of Najee Harris to the green here. but I think that they're very, very capable still. Now, Ezekiel Elliott, you got him as your fifth guy here. He's a red for me, and the reason why is because I think that Zeke, after his contract is done, is a free agent. They're not going to continue to keep Zeke for any money. I think that they regret that contract pretty heavily for what they've been able to get from Ezekiel Elliott since they signed him to that 6-year contract. So I think that he's got maybe 1 year left. He's got 2022. I think 2023 they can cut him and save a ton of money. So I think that he might be out on his way out after this season. We've already seen it. Tony Pollard has been better this last season, and I know everyone's going to point to the injury that Zeke had last year, but still, Zeke's been on the downward trend for a while now. You know, he's got a lot of carries. He's got a lot of usage on his body. He's not nearly as explosive as he was in his early days in the league, right? So I think that there's a little bit of risk with Zeke Elliott, especially if he's not with Dallas. If he is not part of this offense, that is a major red flag. So I have him 1 tier below. All the guys above him are signed to longer-term contracts. Like I said, Zeke could be cut next year and save a boatload of money for the team. So that's the only downside with Zeke. But this year, again, I really like him. I think you have 5 guys here that are going to be top 15 running backs, 4 top 10. So it's a very, very loaded running back class that he has on his roster. Now, the purple guys here, Dameon Pierce, Chase Edmonds, Kenneth Gainwell, and Keontae Ingram. Ingram's kind of interesting. He's the hot waiver ad for most people in Dynasty right now. He's kind of a handcuff to James Conner, so I like that right there. Kenneth Gainwell, he was very good in Philly last year, but didn't get a ton of usage. So if that ticks up, you could have another guy right here, another RB2, that you're just stashing on your roster. And it's great to have this much depth at running back as well, because we all know running backs, they miss time, they get banged up. It's a very brutal position to play. So having these guys that you could go to in a worst case scenario, where if you lose one of these guys, it doesn't kill you and it's not detrimental to your team, I think is a massive plus right there. And again, it's 10 teams, so you want those elite guys. 4 top 10 running backs is insane for a competition level. Now, wide receiver, this is the weakest grouping that I think he has on his team. Tyreek Hill at the top, love it. He's with Miami now, he's with Tua. There's a little bit of a stack right there, but it does concern me a little bit there that he's not going to have Patrick Mahomes anymore. So I don't know if you're going to have a top 5 wide receiver again. More than likely, I'm betting on him finishing that high. I think that Mike McDaniel is going to utilize him and try and put him in more of a Debo. And I know it's such an easy comparison, but I think that they're going to try and get Tyreek Hill the ball as much as possible. Robert Woods over in Tennessee, he's coming off an ACL tear that was a little bit later. I think it was like week 4, week 5 in the season last year. So he's not going to even have a full year under his belt when he comes back for Tennessee. But everything, all the news reports and everything from camp says that he's doing pretty well in his recovery. So he should be just fine. So you have 2 wide receivers that you have to start each and every week. These are your 2. After that, Sky Moore is your 3rd. Cordero Patterson, OBJ, who's still a free agent. He tore his ACL, in the Super Bowl? Excuse me. That's not a great group of depth here. So Sky Moore, he's a rookie. He might not even get a ton of playing time this year just because he's a rookie. Like, I know everyone is down on Juju. They don't like him as much as Sky Moore. Sky Moore is the new hotness and everything like that. But MVS and Juju could easily shut out Sky Moore from a significant role in year 1. Long term, you might be fine, but it's not something that would make me feel comfortable if, for example, Robert Woods didn't start the season off at full health. He started a little bit slower. Not having Sky Moore to pivot to does make me a little bit nervous. Cordero Patterson, he's really old, so you were not going to have him for much longer. But I think that if he can start the season like he did last year, you'll be just fine. So for fantasy, you should be okay if you need to swing to someone like Patterson. Again, if you start the season and Robert Woods isn't as explosive as you thought he was going to be, you could switch to Cordero Patterson, and I think you'd be okay. OBJ, you're going to have him for a playoff push, so that might be okay. It might save you in that realm, but yeah, it's a very thin group of wide receivers, which is okay because you only have to start 2 of them with 3 flex. And honestly, I think you're going to be starting 5 running backs almost every single week, maybe 4 and 2 tight ends. But yeah, it's a thin group of receivers that I think you could definitely fill out a little bit more. Now you get to the lower guys on this list, Allen Lazard, KJ Hamler. Those 2 are kind of sleepers. They might be something. Allen Lazard is the de facto number 1 wide receiver for Green Bay. He's got the most tenure with the group right now. The best connection with Aaron Rodgers. So he might actually be an elite option for fantasy. It's just very hard to predict that based on everything we've seen over the last couple of years in Green Bay. So I don't want to give you a ton of, I don't want to shut you down completely, but I don't want to give you a ton of hope either. So I'm just kind of in the middle with Allen Lazard. He might be someone that is a very, very good fantasy option, but I just don't want to overestimate what he can do. KJ Hamler, same thing. Coming off an injury. He's young. He is the same draft class as Jerry Jeudy. Pretty high draft pick. I think a 2nd round pick in that draft class. So they really invested highly in KJ Hamler. They want to see him and what he can do, but he is number 4 right now on the depth chart behind Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton, and Tim Patrick. So he's going to have to fight for that 3rd spot, and whether or not that's going to be valuable for fantasy. But again, he could be the number 2 guy really easily. He has the talent for it. He could overtake Tim Patrick and Courtland Sutton, in my opinion. It's just whether or not he can recover from that injury and put it all together on the field. So there's a couple guys right there in the purple that are very potentially interesting options. But again, I don't want to fill you with too much hope. Then the last guys here, in a 10-team league, I don't think they make enough of a difference that, yeah, if you had to make a roster decision, you could cut any of these 4 and I wouldn't be too hurt about it. Will Fuller is probably the only one where I'd hang on to him if he signed with a good team. But yeah, I'm not too thrilled about him personally. Now, tight end, and I'm not saying to cut these guys either, by the way. You're definitely going to hang on to them unless you need to cut for a specific player. So just to make sure that's clear. Now, tight end, Mark Andrews is your cornerstone piece here. I love him for fantasy football. He's right now my tight end 3. Real quick too, jumping back. Wide receiver, we're going to give you a 6. And again, this is the biggest weakness on this team, is just there's a lot of unknown there at the wide receiver position. It's very thin, and yeah, it could be a little bit worse than what you anticipate it being early in the season. Now, tight end, Mark Andrews again, he's my tight end 3 in Dynasty rankings, so you have a lot of very elite options on this team. Dalton Schultz, he's going to be a top 10 tight end in my opinion. He just re-signed with Dallas. I really love Dalton Schultz. He's very underrated. So because it's 1.5 tight end premium for this league, I really like that as well. I think that Mark Andrews and Dalton Schultz, you'll probably be starting them almost every single week in this format, just because that extra half point, Dalton Schultz gets peppered enough with targets that it's going to be very valuable to start him every single week with a 3 flex league. Other than that, it's a little thin, but it is tight end. So having 2 top 10 tight ends in a 10-team league is a very big plus, in my opinion. You got a couple guys here that are interesting. Trey McBride, he's not going to probably be very valuable in year 1. Jelani Woods, same thing. They're both rookies this year, but long-term, I am very excited about both of those guys. So I think that you have very good playability in year 1 here in 2022, and it's not your year 1, but year 1 for my if this was a startup, that's how I'd be looking at it. But Trey McBride and Jelani Woods in the back, that is very interesting. And then Robert Tonyan is another guy who's kind of interesting. He's coming off an Achilles tear, I believe, or an ACL. I can't remember which one it was specifically, but it is a little bit nerve-wracking there. But again, we don't know who the number 1 target for Aaron Rodgers is going to be over in Green Bay. It could very well be Robert Tonyan gets the 10-plus touchdowns that he did from 2 years ago. it's hard to say at this point in time. So I like him as a potentially useful option where he could be slotted in as another flex week to week, potentially, but I'm not betting on that at this point in time. And then you got Dawson Knox, who I like. He showed a little bit of a breakout last season, but it didn't sustain for very long. But he's someone who could definitely jump up into the green tier if he starts if he shows what he started last year. I think that he could be very good for a long period of time. I think that he'd be a capable starter if needed. Brevin Jordan, he's just a year 2 tight end. We have to see a little bit more. You're probably not going to see much from him until next year, so you're just kind of hanging on to him. He's a big mystery, but if he can start to show something, show a little bit of that spark in year 2, yeah, it's definitely something that you could have long term. So just something there. And then Logan Thomas with Washington and Taysom Hill. Like I said, I'm not too thrilled about either one of these guys. So tight end, I'm gonna definitely give you a 9 here. The number 3 guy, if it was Kittle or Pitts, it'd probably bump you up to a 10. But Mark Andrews, the only downside with Mark Andrews is his big breakout last year was not with Lamar Jackson. It was with Tyler Huntley. I don't think that's going to be a big problem when Lamar Jackson comes back here. But again, it's a little bit of a projection at this point in time. So I am going to knock you just 1 point just for that. But I think it's a very good group of guys week to week. So don't take what I'm saying to heart. I think it's a very good, solid group of tight ends here. So I like them every single week, and we'll see what they can do going into the season. Now, the last thing I have here for a grade is the depth. And again, you're very deep at every single position except for wide receiver. I'm not too thrilled about your wide receiver depth. So overall, I'd probably give you a 9 out of 10 here. I think that if it was me personally, what I would do, and this will transition right into the strengths and weaknesses. So definite strengths, elite options at the top. In a 10-team league, you really like to see that. The weaknesses are definitely wide receiver, and the strategy that I would be looking at going forward would be, if it was me, I would probably take someone like Zeke, James Conner, one of those 2 guys, maybe even Alvin Kamara, and really go target a couple wide receivers. If you can get 2 wide receivers, if you can throw James Conner and Allen Lazard for like 2 wide receivers, I don't know, like a Jerry Jeudy or who's someone else? A.J. Brown, someone that people are a little bit lower on because he went to Philly, or Devontae Adams because he went from Green Bay to the Raiders. Someone like that, I would go and try and target one more elite wide receiver option, because I think that if you could pair them with Tyreek Hill and Robert Woods, because you only need to start 2 wide receivers every single week, and those wide receivers are less likely to get catastrophically injured than the running backs are, I think that you'd be looking very, very good from that perspective. You got the elite quarterback options that will definitely carry you week to week, barring injury. You got more than enough running backs that'll be able to fill all those flexes for your roster. You got 2 tight ends that should be able to perform very, very well for fantasy here. And then, yeah, if you can just get one more, I think, elite option at wide receiver, this team would be rocking. So that said, the final reveal, and I worked really hard on this, so don't trash me too much, but the final reveal, my final score is an 8 out of 10 for this roster. I think the wide receiver is the biggest thing dragging you down. You got a 9 in depth and tight end, but a 10 in quarterback and running back. So averaging that out a little bit, I think the wide receiver is carrying you down. I had you at an 8.5, but I don't really want to do half points. Maybe I should have rounded that to 9, but it's right there, 8 or 9 out of 10. It's a very, very solid roster. I really like this roster, especially in 10-team tiered PPR. It's very, very good. I just think you need to get one more wide receiver, and you'll definitely be able to compete. It really helps that you still have all of your picks for 2023 and 2024 going forward. So long-term wise, you have a lot of youth and you have a lot of draft capital as well. So there's a lot to like about this roster, and I think it's very well done. So 8 out of 10, maybe a little bit harsh, but I'm trying not to be too soft in my rankings. Maybe I'll ease up as I start doing more of these rate my rosters as we go forward. But yeah, I think 8 out of 10 for me, it's like almost you'd have to have like a perfect roster to get a 10 out of 10. One or two small weaknesses get you a 9. And again, you probably have just a little bit too much of a weakness at wide receiver for me. That's why I gave you an 8. So really like this roster. Hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. If you want your team broken down and my opinion on the strengths and weaknesses of your roster, please feel free to hit me up on Twitter at TDC_Calvin or comment on YouTube. That's another way to get the comments in there. And I'd love to get you on the list going forward. Again, I'm not going to do these every single episode. I'm going to still have the regular podcast. I'm trying to do 1 or 2 of those a week where I talk about specific dynasty topics, players, sleepers, busts, breakouts, stuff like that. But I want to do 1 or 2 of these a week as well. So if you're interested, hit me up. Let me know. I'd love to get you on the list. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this. So one last time, I'll show you the roster here. Let me know what you guys agree with on my takes. So, and the one nice thing is this is all very subjective. It's all my opinion on this, but feel free to disagree if you have a different opinion than me, and I won't take it to heart. I love doing these. I love breaking them down and just kind of giving you my thoughts on it. I've been wrong. That's why I don't like to do best ball. I like to transition and pivot when I need to in season. But yeah, my early off-season opinion is it's a very solid roster. Try and get one more wide receiver. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you guys have a good night, and we'll see you next time.